You know Dewey's Bakery for its iconic sweets and treats, the sugar cakes, the thin cookies, and the cake squares, especially on Mondays when you can get one of those delectable squares for free. But during these hot months, you can't forget about the ice cream. Made from scratch and featuring all your favorite flavors, Dewey's ice cream is the perfect way to beat the heat this summer. And what do we always tell you about Dewey's? It's the place for all of life's celebrations. And in the summer, that means weddings. Since 1930, Dewey's has been crafting delicious wedding cakes, plus custom cupcakes and groom's cakes. Team up with one of their celebration specialists to find the perfect fit for your special day. To get started, just email cake@deweys.com or swing by the Thruway location in Winston-Salem. And for any of your everyday cravings, you can also visit the store at Renolda Manor or at Friendly Shopping Center in Greensboro. Dewey's, celebrate every day.
This is the Triad Podcast Network.
Hi, everyone. Hope you're having a great summer and a belated happy 4th of July to everybody. We're recording this before the 4th, but you're likely listening to it after the 4th. It is summertime, and we've got a variety of topics that we always try to choose from when it comes to our financial discussions with our certified financial planner, Jennifer Johnson from Three Magnolias Financial Advisors here in Winston-Salem. We've got some really interesting ones that are on the horizon. You want to stay tuned for that. We're going to talk some back to school. We're going to talk about a topic that I think a lot of people will be able to relate to, which is pet insurance. That one's coming soon. And so this is a great time to get on board with our financial podcast because the topic today will be interesting. We've got a lot more already lined up for the future. But today, Jennifer, we wanted to talk about something that a lot of people have heard about, and they probably have a somewhat of an idea of what it's used for and how people take some of the benefits of it. But there's a lot that people don't understand about how it works now and how it might work in the future. And those are two very different things. We're talking about Social Security. So, Jennifer, let's just maybe start from the very basics.
Sure.
What is Social Security?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great starting point. Yeah, I mean that's because that's true. Some of our listeners may not be familiar at all, but essentially it's a payment system. And it also can be for people who become disabled. So you might hear people say they're on Social Security disability, and those would be people that are under retirement age, that have paid into a system. And then if you qualify, you start to receive monthly income to replace your income, because obviously you'd be disabled in that example. Most commonly, though, is for workers who have paid into the Social Security system through payroll taxes. And we'll talk about what those are maybe in a second too. And then when you hit certain ages, typically your earliest age is 62. Now there's a few different key ages that we could talk about too, like for widows that you could claim as early as 60, for example. Most people, there's an age, which is what we call your full Social Security age. And for basically everyone now, that's 67. So there's certain key ages that you hit. And essentially you start to get income, from the government, from this Social Security fund that pays you, in theory, a lifetime income that comes out on a monthly basis. So that's when you think about Social Security, that's what we think of. And it's been in the news a lot lately. I don't know if you've read anything, Adam, about it.
I admittedly, I have not read much about it. It's not necessarily something that's on my my news radar right now, but it should be. I mean, I'm still in my early to mid 40s, and so ideally it wouldn't be something that I would be able to utilize for who knows another 15
20 plus
20 years, right?
Yeah.
So but there might be people who are a little bit closer to it in our listening audience. There might be people who maybe already are using it. But let me go back to something that you once said said earlier. And again, just sticking to some of the fundamentals here at the beginning, which is most, if not everybody, pays into Social Security, that fund.
Yeah.
How do people contribute to it?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because what caught my eye and why I thought people might be interested, which we'll see these articles periodically, but an article came out. There's a fund. It's an old age and survivors insurance trust fund. Is I think its official title. It's really a fund within our federal government that we fund through payroll taxes. And you've probably heard those jokes like when people get their first job and you're making like, I don't know, $10 an hour, right? And you work 20 hours this week, and then you go to your paycheck and you're like, wait a minute, shouldn't I
Mm-hmm.
have $200? But you don't have $200, right? You have like $200 less some federal tax and maybe state tax withholding, and then less something called FICA too, like, and that's like a learning experience, I think, for new workers. Are like, who is this FICA person, and like, why are they taking my money? And FICA is an abbreviation. There's so many abbreviations in these things, but FICA is the Federal Insurance Contributions Act. So when you see FICA, like, that's what that means. And so really through those taxes that you pay as an employee, and then your employer also pays, something people don't realize. Now, self-employed people, if you've ever been self-employed, like I have been, you pay both sides, right? You pay as the employee and the employer, but those taxes and their percentage of your income are going in to help fund this trust fund, if you will. So when we earn money, our part of that goes into that fund. And then, of course, we've got people now, that are 60, if you're a widower, as I said, most of the time 62, or older, and they've started to collect. So now there's some rules, and we probably wouldn't be real exciting to like get into the rules about like when you're eligible and all that jazz too, and like how much you have to pay into it and all that. That could be a whole podcast of its own, certainly. But what caught my eye, that what I thought might make it interesting to talk about this is that trust fund. So when people like hear like, oh, Social Security is going to be depleted, like, so I feel like that's a fairly common, headline that we'll see periodically. They're talking about that trust fund, that fund that we're paying into with those FICA taxes that they're then paying out of to people that are retired. Does that make sense in terms of like the funding and how, the
Yeah.
payouts of it?
Yeah, there has to be money in that fund to be able to pay out to
That's
people.
right.
It's so
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
it's
right.
money gets, I guess for lack of a better word, invested by the American
Well, it
population,
does.
by the
It
American
does.
population, and then gets paid out to people when they become eligible for it. And so it's fair to say, right, or it's fair to ask that, is this something that most people will count on as a part of their retirement
Oh, they
plan?
do. Yeah. Like there's a large percentage of people that are retired right now that they literally just live on Social Security. And it's a pretty modest income, honestly. I think the average payments in that $1,300 to $1,400 a month,
That barely
payment.
covers
So
rent these days.
I know. Yeah, I know. Like, so it's really not a lot when you think about, well, the cost of living, to your point today. But for a lot of people, it's super critical. And I think for people, I'm also in my 40s too. So when you think about planning ahead for your own retirement, I think what's hard is, what do you count on there, right? Like when I think about like what we need to put away for retirement, what income sources we'll have, like, do you assume that that we're paying into this system and we should get it? Because you see like these kind of scary articles, right? Like, because what this, and I probably skipped over this, but what this article said was, and we've always known that the funding that's going into that trust fund I mentioned, like what we're paying in there is not enough to cover what's going out, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that fund is slowly declining. In recent projections, I know when I used to share with people, we used to get actually a statement in the mail that says like, this is your Social Security benefit. And it would say actually on the cover sheet, the Social Security Trust Fund is scheduled to be depleted by the year 2035, because there's people like working on this and looking at this, and saying, okay, we know what's coming in roughly, we know what's going out, like how does that look? Because they only invested, this might be an interesting fact for people, it's invested in like federal, like treasury securities, so it's the government securities, so they do invest the excess there, but it's not earning, a lot, obviously. So we can have kind of an idea on what's coming in versus going out. Interestingly enough, the last time they did the calculation, I said 2035 was the date we expected it to be depleted. It came a little closer. It was 2034. And then
Hmm.
with this most recent calculations they did, we're expecting that fund to run out by 2033, which is, so the concern is, that date. Well, two things, I guess. One, that we realize that's only like 8 years. Like that seems crazy to me, but 2033 is only 8 years away. And then it's getting closer. We're running through it, faster than prior projections. So it's a interesting thing, and it creates some planning, I think, challenges, for people to know, if you're coming up on retirement, or, we're like, gosh, if it's going to be depleted by 2033 and I'm going to retire in 2045, like, should I just not count on it? Are the
Right.
questions that I get.
Is that what could potentially be a reality here? Is
Well,
Social Security benefits could just go away entirely?
yeah, like I think that's always, it is possible. But what I tell people, and part of, I think, our goal in these type discussions is really to educate people, and avoid some of the, like, the headlines that try to grab you and sort of are a bit sensationalized sometimes. And if they say to you, hey, Social Security is going away, like that's going to get some eyeballs. I
Sure.
wouldn't necessarily say that to people. And I don't tell people that. And I say that for, a few reasons. One, I think, as a nation, I mean, I said earlier, a lot of people live completely on Social Security. I just don't think we can afford to not have something in place, right? I mean, you're going to have a lot of really impoverished senior citizens, and I just don't think that's tolerable, for us as a country. So I think that that's unlikely. I think though that realistically, as we see those numbers, like we know, like it can't go on in the same way, it's going now. Like we all know, like the math just doesn't work, right? And so the good news though about that is, even if they depleted the fund, I mean, you'll still have money coming in, right? It's not like in 2033 we're going to quit paying that FICA person, right? Like we're going to still be, they're still going to have money. They're still going to take part of our paycheck, whether we like it or not. And so money's still going to go in there. And the projections are, even if this fund were depleted, like we would still have around 80% of the payout covered just through those incoming FICA tax. So does that make sense? So like, I don't know if that's a worst case scenario, but let's say you're, instead of me getting, if I was just to make the math easy, I was supposed to get $1,000 a month at 62, maybe that's 800.
Yeah.
If nothing changed, and just because maybe we don't have the money. So that's a possibility. I think that's a possibility that, benefits could be cut. I think it's more likely though that they would make some changes to
Sure.
the structure of Social Security. And I know people are like, well, what does that mean? So I mean, one thing they could do, I mean, you could look at the age, that people are able to collect Social Security. I mean, if you think about 62 with the longevity that we have right now, they're collecting those benefits for a really long time. I had a client go till 103. And so, she collected for a really long time. And actuaries are looking at that and like, oh my goodness, now that's one reason, we're running through the fund. So, one potential change is they could look at, okay, if I had a new baby born today, maybe that new baby couldn't collect at 62, right?
Be
They would make that.
65 or
Yeah,
something. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. exactly, like they could fish it
Yeah.
out.
There's nothing like summertime here in the North Carolina Triad. And when it comes to the season's can't miss events, at the top of the list is the Coal Pit Live Music Series at Incendiary Brewing in downtown Winston-Salem. And this year, our wonderful partners at the Ginther Group are proud to sponsor it to help provide unforgettable fun all summer long. The 2025 schedule begins on May 31st and runs all the way through Incendiary's 7th anniversary party on September 13th. If you visit theginthergroup.com or follow them on Facebook and Instagram, you'll be able to see the details on every upcoming show, along with any special promotions. Again, a huge shout out to the Ginther Group Real Estate for sponsoring this year's Coal Pit Live series at Incendiary Brewing. And a great way to join us in helping to say thank you, just keep them in mind for all your real estate needs. It's one simple phone call, 336-283-8689, or just one simple click to theginthergroup.com. How did we get to this point where this issue is
Are we getting this close?
where it could be
Yeah.
this close? And I guess I have a theory in that. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I always get my my generation names
Yeah.
confused. But
Sure.
we're kind of in the age of the baby boomers in that
Sure.
retirement range, correct?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a big part of it. It's demographics, right? Like, because we had a lot of population move into retirement, so they quit paying in. They quit paying into the FICA, and now
Mhm.
they're taking money out. And there's a lot of them, and not as many people working, and paying
Right.
into that. So, like demographically, that's a challenge. That's why you hear like some of the folks suggest that we need to have more babies. Have you heard that? Like that's what.
I mean, it's the numbers are pretty staggering in terms of
Yeah.
the amount of babies being born in this era
Yeah.
versus 40, 50 years ago.
Right, right. Yeah. That's what I've heard people say, like for the economy, for our nation, we were supposed to be having more children. I'd like to point out that I've had two. So like I feel like I've done my
Three
part
here,
and you've
so
done
yeah,
your
we've
part.
more than
So
done our part. Yeah.
that's right. So I don't know if you're listening, like that's one way you can personally help out this trust fund situation. But you're right, it's like demographics. And then I think like this is not a surprise, right? Like I said, like years ago, we were getting these letters with our statements, right? They were like, this thing's going to be depleted. And back then we thought 2035, which I don't know if you're like me. When I was getting those 20 years ago, I was like 2035, that feels like forever ago. And then you're all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, that's soon. Now it's
Yeah.
2033. And I think just the way like Congress like works, right? Even though we've seen this coming, and I think it is becoming more urgent. I think we'll have to have some clarity, within the next decade about how we're going to deal with this.
Hmm.
Um, the way they tend to work is this is obviously very unpopular, right? I mean, because if you're paying into the system or you're getting a benefit, I mean, you don't want to be told you might not get it. You might get less for what you've paid in. It's also unpopular to like raise taxes, right? I mean, and that's another option. I didn't mention that. They could change the way benefits are paid out. They also could change, how funding goes into this trust fund, right? Like for example, I mentioned, the FICA person, taking our money. FICA only is on a certain dollar amount of our pay, right? Like,
Right.
so that's another interesting thing is like they only charge that percentage, that FICA cap. And it's weird numbers. Like it's a total of like 12.4%, like between you and your employer that go into this fund. You're paying half, your employer's paying half essentially. And they only do that on the first 168,000 roughly in income. So you've got a lot of people that are earning a lot more than that. Um, but they're not paying FICA on those. Now they also they only get a benefit based on that 100, on a certain cap, of Social Security. Like so you max out kind of on Social Security. But like one thing people have suggested is like, okay, let's just remove that, cap. And if you made 250,000 or, a million or whatever, you've got to pay, that FICA tax on the full amount that you earn. And that would make a big difference, but it's unpopular, right? Like, I mean, if you're in Congress and you're like, you know, I mean, you're being
There
told like
is,
you're paying
yeah,
too much, like consistently, I'm sure.
there is no popular solution for this, right?
No,
Because
no, there is not.
you have
There
to
is
make the
not.
math work, and so
That's right.
it's either increase the amount that gets put into the fund, or
Yeah,
decrease the amount that gets paid out by the fund. And
that's
neither
right.
one is popular, because it
That's
either
right.
means increasing taxes for
That's
people,
right. That's right.
increasing how long it's going to take before you start getting the
Yeah.
benefits,
Yeah.
or it's just smaller payouts,
That's right.
and so
That's right.
there is no great option here.
There's no happy. Yeah, there's no
No.
happy answer, is there? Like, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes,
No, there's nothing to get real excited about. I mean, to me, and my guess is like they'll have to do something, right?
they have to. Yeah, they
And
have
then
to.
ironically, I mentioned this article that brought this topic to mind for me that I thought other people might have questions about. And then in between the time, you and I were working on the topic, they're also working on this mega bill, in
Yeah.
Congress right now. And, one of Trump's proposals was no tax on Social Security, was one of his sort of campaign promises, if you will, or something he supports. And they're trying actually to give a break, I guess, if you will, like to seniors. What they're proposed in here is an extra sort of standard deduction for seniors, to help reduce the amount, of tax people are paying on Social Security. So it's interesting, like we know this is a problem, right? But, even in our current discussions, it doesn't feel like we're really it feels like if anything we may be going the opposite
Yeah.
direction of really dealing with that, in part because it's so unpopular. And I know part of some people would say, well, if you reduce taxes, it'll stimulate the economy as people spend more, and federal tax revenues will increase, because of more income taxes and more sales taxes and things like that, which could be true. But we've got, this specific, I think, issue
Yeah.
that makes it challenging, certainly from because retirement is the biggest thing that people come to an advisor for. There are other questions, but typically it's this, and it's around these issues, I think, that are so hard for people to figure out on their own, because you may read five different articles, with five different ideas about how to deal with the uncertainty,
Yeah.
around this, because it makes a huge difference. I mean, particularly if you've been a decent earner, most of your career, I think if you're at the max, income that's being taxed, if you waited till the most you could get, which would be your age 70, you're getting close to $5,000 a month, from Social Security. Now, most people aren't in that situation. They've not been at the max, their whole career, and they typically started earlier than that. But it's not a small amount, and it does impact people's retirement situations a lot.
Yeah. So let me ask you about this, because, like you said, one of the biggest reasons why people work with a financial advisor like yourself is to plan for
Yeah,
retirement. So,
right.
in your conversations with people, and I'm not asking for just general advice that everyone can use. This is just maybe just something to think about. How should people approach what they do for their retirement savings, knowing that there's a
Yeah,
possibility that, hey,
yeah,
when if let's say you're going to retire in 2033,
right,
2034, or
right.
slightly after that, you may be looking at decreased amounts of Social
Well,
Security.
that's right.
So
Yeah,
what do you advise people on if that's
yeah,
a possibility?
yeah. What I do in planning for people a lot of times is I'll use a portion perhaps of their benefits. So if they're 20 plus years out, and we know we're going to be in this window where the trust fund would be depleted. And we know there's a possibility if nothing changes, they would only get a portion of their benefit. Like what I'll do typically to be conservative is say, okay, plan on like half your benefit. So if you looked at your statement, if you went online, they actually do have a good website as well for the Social Security Administration. And it takes a minute, to get set up, but you can see your earnings record. You can see what your payment's going to be. It's ssa.gov. It's an excellent website. They also have calculators you can use if you don't want to go to the trouble of setting up an actual, account. But let's say it's $2,000 a month is your projected benefit. I'll say, okay, let's plan on half of that. Let's plan on $1,000, because that way, you don't want to paint an unnecessarily negative, picture of somebody's retirement situation, but you also don't want to say, okay, Mr. and Mrs. Client, you will have educated your children, you will have paid off all your debts, you live a conservative income. Now you may only need $5,000 a month, and you look at husband and wife, and you're like, oh, well, good news, they've got $4,500 in Social Security. You're golden, and then get to that point, and they don't really have that much Social Security. So that's been my opinion on how to approach it, is to say, okay, if you're within kind of a window. Now, if you're already there, if you're already in your 60s, you're already like collecting it. Personally, I think it's going to be too hard for them to say like, okay, I'm so sorry, Mr. and Mrs. Senior Citizen, we're going to cut your check. Like, I just don't like, that's my personal opinion. I think they're probably okay. And I think like a really young worker, a lot of times you're in your 20s. I'm like, let's just pretend like it doesn't exist, because we really don't know. Like we're looking out such a long period of time. I think that becomes so difficult to know what it would look like 40 years into the future, that I just say to them, hey, you may need to go ahead and start saving more for retirement, because we don't know what that's going to look like. Does that help at all a little
It does.
bit in how I
I
think
think that
about
makes
it?
sense in terms of how far off you are. So yeah, if you're in the
Yeah.
younger, if you're just started working, you're in your 20s, mid to late 20s, just when you're trying to determine how much you want to save for retirement, let's not factor in Social Security at all.
Yeah.
If you're in your
Yeah.
60s, you can, and especially
Yeah.
if you're already collecting it, like you said.
Yeah.
If you're in your 40s, like you and I are, maybe you say,
Yeah.
okay, here's what you're projected to get. Maybe let's cut that in half in terms of how much it could play into what your.
That's what I do.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
that's what I do. I think that's a fair estimate. I mean, I think that's, if anything, maybe perhaps a bit uh, too conservative, maybe. But in your planning,
But
I said it's just so
it's better to be too
dangerous.
conservative
That's
about it.
my feeling,
Yeah,
because if you get there and you, instead of getting half of your benefit, you get 80%, you're going to be
great.
excited. But if I've planned on 100% and you only get 80, we're like, oh my gosh, now they're eating like cat food and stuff, and like we
Oof.
can't be having you doing that. And so like we just don't want to be, we want to be prudent, in our planning. And so that's how I personally approach it. And I mean, I think there's a lot of fear too, unfortunately, like, because I'll have some people that are already collecting Social Security that, I just know in passing. It happened to me at the Y, actually, like a few months back, when this was kind of a hot issue, and people were, people were going through the elections, and there were just a lot. This was, I think, in the news a bit more, and she had saw something on local news, and she was really worried they were going to take her benefit away. And there have been some concerns with something called means testing. Are you familiar with that? Do you think people know what that is, Adam? If not, I can
I'm not familiar.
explain.
I'm not familiar with that. No.
So that's maybe the most kind of concerning things I think that people hear. And the way that would work is like the means testing is they would sort of qualify you based on what other income sources and other assets you have. And so, for example, if you've just say I planned well, I've got a nice 401k balance, IRA balance. My husband's worked for the school system as well. He's got a pension. Is there look at me and say, Jennifer David, congratulations that you've planned so well. It's clear you don't need Social Security, so you just don't get it. Like that's kind of the thing that I think people are, if you have the means, to provide for yourself, they just wouldn't give it to you. And instead, people of lesser means or lower income, if you will, would qualify for it. And
I
that
gotcha.
really gets people worked up because I think one, it's where would they draw that line?
Right.
How do you decide? And so somebody might be barely over because they've been a teacher or something and they have like a decent pension. But if you take $1,000 $1,200 away from them, like that's pretty scary for them if they're living on that income now. And so people get very nervous about that. People also get pretty enraged, frankly, too, because
Yeah. Because you have to
they've
there's
paid.
other variables too, like where you
Yeah,
live and what's your family situation. And so
exactly.
you can't just use a number. It's like you said, it's like we said earlier, there are no popular decisions in
That's
any of
right. That's right. I think that would be particularly unpopular. And I think just from like my um I don't know if it's I don't know if it's unfair or not, but I feel like there's a survival instinct for our Congress people, and they'll be like, I mean, do you really want to say to your people who have paid 6 or 12%, depending upon if you're self-employed or not, into a system for 30 plus years, like
Mm-hmm.
now because you've been a good saver, you don't get anything out of that? Like, I just think that would be so unpalatable. Like, I mean, I personally think they'll probably do some combination of like taking that cap off, of their limits on how much you'd pay in, and then like altering, because they've done that in the past. Like they've changed your what I called your full Social Security age. That's now 67, I think, for everybody
Mm-hmm.
who's approaching Social Security. It was like people years ago, it'd be like 66 and 3 months and stuff like that. They've changed that full age in the past. And I think to me it would be very easy to say, like, okay, new babies that are born, you're gonna live longer. You can't collect to your 70, and I don't think any the new babies are gonna know that as they grow up and working with their planners. And I think that's to me a lot more acceptable than any kind of means testing or just a blanket reduction,
Yeah.
um,
The new
in
babies
your
will be
benefit.
crying. Yeah, the new babies will cry. You think they're
They cry
hungry,
either way, you
but
don't
they're
think?
really upset about how long it would take them to collect
That's
Social
right.
Security.
That's
Um,
right.
well, one of the things that I learned is there's a way you can check to see what your projected Social
Yeah.
Security
Oh,
income will
yeah.
be. I didn't know that.
You sure can. It's actually really good. Like, I can send you the link, Adam, if you want to share that with
Yeah, I'd love to
folks.
include it in the notes. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good website. There's several little security steps to create an account. So people prepared, if folks want
Okay.
to do that. But it's interesting to go in there and you can see your wages too. Like it'll show you year to year. These were the wages used, and that's how it calculates. What your benefit might be.
Okay.
Um, I think like we said earlier, it makes planning interesting though, because, a lot of people would look at that and be like, oh, I'm great, and then if you hear, I might not get that, that's
Yeah.
something just, it's a hard issue. I think people need to be aware of it. I think you need to kind of understand, especially as whether you're close to claiming the benefit or not. I think it's good for people uh, to know how the Social Security system works, to understand, how, um, how you can claim benefits. And then also, I would say stay tuned because I'm sure there's going to be a lot more on this issue as we figure out how this is going to be funded, what it's going to mean for people that are particularly a little farther out from retirement.
Well, as we navigate this, it's great to have people like you and Three Magnolias to help folks
Yeah,
and guide them through wherever Social Security might be and how it might factor into your plans
right.
for retirement. So if people want to talk to you and your team about their own situation, how can they do so?
Yeah, and I really think that's advisable, frankly, because as we said, there are so many variables, particularly Social Security, because there's spousal benefits and things like that are hard to kind of know. Feel free, folks can reach out to us. Like you said, we are local to Winston-Salem, and they can even call us at 336 701-1600. Check us out online. Our website is Three Magnolias Financial Advisors.com. And that's all spelled out, advisors with an S, because there's more than one of me. There are several of us in the office. So one of us would love to chat with you, understand kind of where you are, particularly in the retirement journey, how to best, incorporate or not incorporate, Social Security planning into that.
Okay. Well, Jennifer, I didn't know that it was possible to make Social Security an interesting topic, but I think we did it. I think we did it here today.
Did we do it?
Yeah, I think so.
Well,
I mean, look,
find it interesting, but I know I'm not I'm not your common listener though, too. So I'm glad to hear that you found it interesting too.
Not that I'm the greatest litmus test for this, but I'm 20 years away from potentially collecting Social Security, whatever that might be. And
Right.
I thought this was interesting. I learned quite a bit.
I hope it helps people. It helps people. Yeah.
All right. Well, Jennifer, enjoy the summer months, and we'll talk to you when we get ready to discuss back to school.
Back to school.
Before we know it.
That's right. Thanks, Adam. It was fun.
Securities offered through Private Client Services, member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Three Magnolias Financial Advisors, located at 110 Oakwood Drive, Suite 480, Winston-Salem, North Carolina, 27103. Three Magnolias Financial Advisors and Private Client Services are not affiliated. Private Client Services is under separate ownership from any other named entity. All information is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representation as to its completeness or accuracy. All economic and performance information is historical and not indicative of future results. The market indices discussed are unmanaged. Additional risks are associated with international investing, such as currency fluctuations, political and economic stability, and differences in accounting standards. The views depicted in this material are for information purposes only, and not necessarily those of Private Client Services. They should not be considered specific advice or recommendations for any individual. Neither Private Client Services nor any of its representatives may give legal or tax advice.
This is the Triad Podcast Network.